Hello. How's it going? No, starting soon screen or anything like that. We're just going to jump right into it because things are a little more clinical and different. No music. It's very like professional. How's it going? Can I hear me okay? Hearing loud and clear? I wanted to, yeah, sorry if I scared you. I wanted to be very like direct for VOD watchers because I'm probably going to make the VOD public rather than like in a stream playlist. So how's it going? Vine boom. All good. Great. All right, sweet. So yeah, so this is going to be like a little different from the usual streams. We're going to do a walk cycle, sort of step by step, and I'll try to answer questions along the way. Put questions on the screen, and then the goal is to have something that by the end I can edit down into a main channel video with like, you know, just questions on screen and like hotkeys, you know, all sorts of things like that. So if you are following along, which you can, you don't need to use Blender, or you don't need to use Maya. You can use Blender. You can use whatever 3D program you want. You just need some sort of like bipedal rig like I have here. So let me bring up my notes. And if you need a rig, I mean, obviously now that I'm starting, it's a little quick. Yeah, Source Filmmaker would be fine. Oh, not that one. Source Filmmaker would be a little more challenging. I'm not super familiar with Source Filmmaker, but as long as a rig has some of the things that I'm going to show you here in a second, you should be able to generally do what I do. This isn't specific to any 3D program. So you're new to all this? Good. Yeah, no problem. So let me pull up my notes. And we'll get started here in just a second. Okay. Are you going to keep the stream up after it's over? Yes. So this will be a VOD. Normally I put my streams unlisted in a playlist, but this one I'm going to try to have public and see what happens because it fits the channel better. You know, previously I all my streams were, I put them as unlisted in a playlist because they were getting suggested to people, which was silly because they're not videos, but this one will be a little bit more of a video. So what I'm thinking is it'll be did I just see a JoJo background? Yeah, that's my desktop background. So my thinking is if this is public as a live video and it gets suggested to people, I'm fine with that because it fits the regular channel. So the other thing about it is also super chats are off, and the chat subscriber only. That just keeps things a little like cleaner and easier for me to follow along with. And then so that whenever I actually put together as a normal video and I hand it to an editor, then they have like clean footage. They don't have to edit out any chat messages or anything like that. So, and like I said, I'm going to try to read questions as we go along as well. So, if you want to support me, then I have Patreon. Patreon.com/Doodley. That'll be like the main way to support me. And since super chats are off, if you want to help me out or help me grow the channel, that's the best way to do it. So let's get started. So right now I have the Gimberly rig set up, and this is basically the walk cycle from the legs video. It's a little, this file is basically a little outdated. After I had started to put together the video, I had edited this animation to fit certain moments in the video and polish it up, you know, that sort of thing. So this has some flaws to it, but let me just play it here and let it go for a second. But this is basically the walk cycle. It's not perfect. There's a lot I would do and a lot I changed in the final video, but it is effectively what we're going to try and recreate today. So that's a pretty good question. Let me read this real quick. Okay, so with a walk cycle, should the arms be FK or should they be IK? And if both of them are used in different situations, what situation should they be in? So normally you'd want an FK because you want this sort of swing. So This is actually probably like the best time for questions, honestly, since we already have a finished walk cycle here. But if you, let me turn off her controls, turning off as the animation plays. Control Viz on playback. Yeah, here we go. So FK is about rotations, right? You want that sort of sweeping curve as the arms rotate. So normally you'd want an FK. The exception would be if your character is holding like a staff or something like that, then you would want one of the arms in IK, just like you would with any other type of device. But normally you want an FK because you want the that swing in the arms like that, like as I go through it. Because you can't really do it in IK. If you did it in IK, I can actually kind of show you. Like this, then you could do like a swing, but it's going to feel very clinical like that. You know what I'm saying? So generally you want it in FK most of the time. It's like animation classes without paying $100K. Yeah, that is basically the goal. Okay. But yeah, so we have the finished walk cycle here. Let me play it with all of the controls on for a second. And yeah, feel free if you know the answer to a question, you feel confident in it, especially if it's a question for like Blender specifics, feel free to answer it. I appreciate that, Matthias. Matthias. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but hopefully that helps. So yeah, we have the finished walk cycle. It's not flawless. There's a lot I would change about it, but it's most of the way there. And this walk cycle, if you're just doing it like a basic cycle like this, where the character stays in place, doesn't move. If you do it right, you can actually do it in very little time. So that's kind of why I'm doing this as like the first test for these streams, is because it's very simple to set up when you know how to do it. So the goal of this stream is to teach you some of those basics for learning how to do this and do it quickly. Because, you can get caught up very easily in the complexities of walk cycles if you start with like this pose and then this pose and then this pose, which is what the video suggests, right? Is like I present it as start with this pose and then this pose and this pose and so on. But you don't, when you're animating in 3D, you don't necessarily want to do that. You really want to do it more in like steps. So let me show you how to do that. So let's load up the Gimberly rig by itself. And we'll take a look at that. So this is the basic Gimberly rig. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but it generally represents what your average rig looks like. If you are looking for a rig to do something like this in, and you're looking for specific kinds of controls in order to do this, you would just need to look for IK legs, as you would expect. You have one control for each of the legs, and when you move it up and down, like that, then you can control the position of it, and the rest of the leg moves to match it, right? The only other thing you would need, ideally you would want more, but the only other thing you would specifically need for something like this is foot roll, which most rigs will have, where if you rotate one of these controls, it will like peel the foot off the ground like that. And if I go backwards, it kind of creates a heel bend backwards. But in order to create good walk cycles, you generally need like a foot roll control. That's a good question. Toxic Quid. So legs don't really work in FK. It's pretty much exclusively IK. Mostly, yes. You can fake it, because again, with just like the arms, you can create that swinging motion in the legs. Like for example, like Minecraft animations, right? Like you theoretically could have like an IK stiff leg in Minecraft, right? Like a Minecraft rig. But generally, in order to keep your feet on the ground, you need IK legs, right? And if you don't have that, you can sort of fake it, but it will feel very floaty, which can work. I mean, you can make that work. there are games on the PS1 and whatnot, or older than that didn't have IK legs. So they would just kind of animate the legs sweeping, right? So you can fake it, but you want IK legs if you can. And it's a very simple thing to implement. So most rigs should have IK legs. And let me read a few more questions here. For this question from Gump, if I'm reading this correctly, for run and walk cycles, would you recommend having actual movement forward and back be done using a model-based plate or just moving across a plane linearly, or do you have another method? If you're referring to, this actually reminds me, thank you for asking this because I almost skipped over this. I meant to have this as part of it. So if I'm reading you correctly, you're referring to creating a walk cycle and then you're animating the character in place. And then if you need a character to go A to B, you just animate the master control or one of these local controls. Is that correct? Versus if you need a character to go to A to B, you would animate the upper body control and then the legs like that. So those are two different methods. The first, sort of animating the master or local control to just move forward, is better for like if the camera is like at this height where you don't need to see the legs. Because if you animate a cycle, we can kind of get into this a little later. If we animate a cycle and then just animate the control underneath, it's easier, but you might have the legs like sliding around. So if the camera's from here and it's for like let's double check this. Yeah, if I animate a walk cycle in a static place and I want to have a person go from A to B using that walk cycle, what would you recommend? So I generally would recommend doing animating your character in place, doing a walk cycle mainly for video games, or if your camera is at that height, right? Like you don't see the feet. Otherwise, I think it is generally better to animate each step and have your character like come off of the rig like that. Like let's say they took 2 steps like that, right? And they kind of come off the main world control. Because then the feet are staying in place and they're not sliding around. You see what I'm saying? We can kind of show that later once we actually animate the rest of the cycle. But it's a very good question. I meant to sort of cover that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but hopefully that kind of gets into that. And it's just a method. It's not like 100% like the way of doing it. Do what works best for what you're doing. Okay, sweet. Thank you for the question, Gub. Okay, so let's start. So where I usually start when it comes to 3D animation and 3D walk cycles, like I said earlier, you don't want to do every single step like I mentioned in the video right away. You don't want to do contact down, pass up, contact, and start with that because it gets too complicated. So instead, we're gonna start. Oh, and let's set up a camera just to have from the side. Like that. Turn on our textures. So let's say we're animating a walk cycle that is 1 second long, and we're animating at 30 frames a second. So 30 frames a second, 30 frames. If the walk cycle is 1 second, we want it to be 30 frames. I think usually like 1 second for like each step in a walk cycle is generally, I find, to be like the best speed, but we can adjust it afterwards. Basically, we're just setting up the keyframes to then adjust as we need it. So to start with, we're just going to focus on the leg feet positions for now. So we'll put at frame 0, we'll put the feet like that and key both. And then we'll also do that for frame 30. So I'm selecting both of my controls like that. Frame 0 and frame 30. I got to turn off her ponytail physics. And then since the walk cycle is 30 frames long, 1 second, and we want the second step to happen right in the middle, frame 15, and then they move to the next position like that. So it's gonna look silly, but you'll just have the ultra uber basic sliding feet, frame 0 to frame 15, 1 step, frame 15 to frame 30, back to the beginning. Looks goofy, obviously, but you want to start as simple as possible. You know, you don't want to get too complicated when it comes to 3D stuff. You know, if you're doing this in 2D, it is good to do those poses, but for 3D, it's better to think about the contact down, up, past contact poses at the end whenever you're like done animating. I think whenever you're doing it in 3D, it's good to start here and then build up from there, because then you're focusing on like the core movements. Yeah, it's a moonwalk. So the other thing we'll do, another very key movement that's required for walk cycles, is we want to move the body down and then up. So let's say this is a good position that we want them at for frame 0 and frame 30. So we'll again key them in this position, key their upper body in this position for frame 0, and then for frame 30. And we'll continuously be doing that because we want it to loop perfectly. So we want frame 0 and frame 30 to be the same throughout the whole thing. And then around frame 15, we can also key at frame 15 just to make it a little easier on us, just so we know the middle of the walking pose. And then right after, so this would be considered a step. Frame 0 and frame 15 are each steps. So right after they take a step, we're going to move them down immediately. And you want it like, this is going to be a little bit of inside baseball for 3D animation versus something like 2D animation, but you want your keys, your curves to kind of look like this. Where's my magnifier? 1 second. There we go. So you want your curves to kind of look like this, where it after a step goes down immediately and then comes back up slowly. And then as it goes back up, right before the next step, then we'll move it up a bit. So it kind of creates that like long S curve, right? Where right after a step, it goes down right away. And then if you choose, we might mess with this in a second, we'll hold it there for a minute, and then it goes up and then back down right away. And then we'll do the same thing for the next one. So right around here-ish, maybe 1 frame earlier. This is probably a little too much, but we'll take a look at it after we got it in place. Yeah, it's probably, I want to probably push it a little bit, maybe around frame 5 and frame 20, and lower these a bit. The copycat. I feel like 2D is just like 3D if you think about it. Yeah, more or less. The way I always see 3D is just 3D is just a way of creating 2D images, because it ends up being 2D, right? So that's why a lot of like 2D principles apply. Same with stop motion. It's all just ways of creating a 2D image. So anything you can do to make it look better, even if it's a something that normally applies to 2D animation, works just as fine in 3D. It might be a little harder to set up, but if it ends up being a 2D image, then you might as well just do it. It's all just about like the processes of getting there that might be different. Yeah. So as it's like this, we will just have uber basic, you know, up and down motion and the feet sliding like that. Very simple, looks very silly. But once we start adding more and more to it, it'll start to look more correct. So for example, if we, like I said earlier, you want to look for rigs with the foot roll controls, like that. Then you can start bending the legs as they sort of go backwards. So we'll do the same thing at frame 0. And frame 0 for this one as well. We might separate the legs a bit more for this, but we'll rotate each of the foot roll controls like that, and then we'll key the same on frame 30. And for, you know, I'm going to separate these a little bit more. Oh, 1 second. There we go. So let's push these out a little bit. And then we'll copy those frames over to make sure that our frames at frame 0 and frame 30 are the same. And then right after a character takes a step, so right after frame 0 and frame 15, we'll snap downwards like that. I like to create, whenever a character takes a step, I like to create a big snap rather than like have it kind of come down slowly. I think usually when you snap the foot downwards, it's a little nicer that way. And then we'll do the same. Push this back. So this will go back on its heel at frame 15. And then snap downwards right afterwards. And same to this one. We're going to have it peel off the ground. So have that snap downwards in the back foot, and then this should be peeling off the ground. Do a little bit more and then copy it over. And then we're also going to raise up each foot. So I have foot roll and I have the feet moving in place. And then we'll also raise this one up. Oh, we're actually gonna let's keyframe each of the feet at frame 15 as well. And then in between frame 0 and frame 15, this back foot, because it's going to raise up, we're going to about frame 8, which is like in between frame 0 and frame 15, we'll raise it up and rotate it like that. So that right after it comes off the ground, it's going to raise upwards and rotate. And then as it goes to frame 15 and it's about to take a step, it goes back downwards. So like that, and then we'll do the same for the back leg. You know, I'm probably also going to adjust my foot roll so it stays flat throughout the first few frames, like that, and then it starts to peel like around the pass. It starts to peel off the ground like that. Yeah, and then we'll do the same as we just did for the front blue foot. We will have it come up and then rotate it. So I lift it up and then rotate it backwards as it passes, then back down. So this should be the basics in place for a walk cycle. I could probably, let me do one more thing here. Looks like it's, yeah, I need to do the, just this so that it's flat like that, and then peels off. So obviously I am not animating the upper body at all. We're just focusing on the legs and the feet. And that helps us determine the best sort of look for the legs themselves before we move on to the rest. We don't want to do everything at once because then it just overloads your brain. So as is right now, a little bit silly. I probably moved the upper body up a little bit too much, but it's pretty much in place, right? I could probably move the back red leg more, you know, move it farther back. But as you can kind of see, like as long as I focus on the main aspects of it, or the core movements rather than the entire character, I already have something in place, right? And then we can go from there and keep making adjustments and whatnot. So real quick, I'm going to move that red, the red foot backwards more, right about there. We will lower the upper body a bit overall because it's straightening out the legs a little too much throughout the walk cycle. So I have it just a little bit lower overall. And let's keep looking at this. I think this is too high. Maybe around there, because you want the legs to bend just a little bit so they don't feel too stiff. And then go back down. Like that. Yeah. And then as is, her upper body is also, because I haven't done anything to the upper body except move it up and down. We also need to move her upper body forward a bit because right now it's leaning too far back. Generally, when you animate anything with the upper body and you can see the entire character, you want to make sure that the center of gravity makes sense, as the sort of legs videos talked about. Right now, because the foot placement is a little bit forward, the center of gravity feels like off. It feels like it should be a little bit closer to here, like right around here-ish, when it's right now, because of the way I animated it, it's a little bit backwards, like it's around here as she walks. But before I move on to that, let's answer funny little questions. Does the character have a name? Yeah, it's Kimberly. Any other questions? I just want to make sure. Dang, it started a long time ago. I didn't refresh it. I'm sorry. That's how it goes. I mean, I said 5 p.m. I saw a couple questions that were asking if it'll be available. Yeah, so normally my streams are available afterwards. They're just in a unlisted or a playlist that contains a bunch of unlisted videos. Because if they're public, like completely public, they get recommended to people, which I don't like. So, but this stream specifically will, I want to see what happens if I made it completely public, and YouTube might suggest it to people because this is different from like the rest of my streams, which are like video games and stuff. So what program is this? This is Autodesk Maya 2023. It's a paid program. And if you're new, you would want to do, I would download Blender instead. Blender's a little easier to use. It's free. And I just use Maya because I'm used to it. But these principles, all this, apply to pretty much any program. You would do the exact same thing in Blender. I just saw one. Does hip movement connect to upper lower torso? Yeah, so I will get into the hip movement and the upper body movement later, because those are sort of interconnected. You know, from the video, you want them to be counterbalanced, and the hips turn inwards to the front foot, and the upper body turns backwards to the back foot. All that, which I'll get into in a bit. Since we're just focusing on the legs right now, we're gonna do that. But since they're interconnected, I'll kind of talk about them both at once whenever we move on to that step. In Ethasia. Do you have any tricks for making walk cycles loop cleanly? Yes, but they're Maya specific. So I can get into that. And I am going to get into how to make walk cycles look better using like small tricks in Maya and looping tricks. But some of those are going to be Maya only, obviously. But I will get into some for sure. I always like this question. Is it better a T pose than an A pose? It generally depends. I would say that in my experience, I tend to see, let me just play this so people know what the progress is so far. Obviously it looks silly. Don't worry about it. Generally, an A pose, I tend to see more with realistic characters. The difference is usually that this gets into some complicated rigging stuff, but what matters is the armpit and shoulder areas. If your characters aren't expected to animate their arms being raised up really high often, you would generally want them to be in an A pose because it's a more natural position. If it's usually with cartoony characters who raise their arms up a lot, you know, when they're scared and stuff like that, you want it to be T posed because you want like a good... you don't want to stretch your armpit area too much. It can generally depend. I've done both in my time. You know, on Nick Brawl, a lot of the characters were T-posed. On some other projects, I've been working in A-pose. It just kind of depends. I think overall, I would say A-pose is better, but I think it depends because you can, with some A-pose characters who are cartoony, you really can have some bad stretching in the armpit area, which I don't like. So like Doodley's T-pose, Kimberly's A-pose. So it's a good question. I always like answering that. I just saw one. Kimberly be available on your Patreon. Kimberly V2 will be free. I have a lot of work I need to do with her, but that'll be completely free rig. I don't want to close it off to anybody. I want a good example of of the kind of rigs I make and work with for people to learn with. All right, so I think we'll move on from here. And we'll make some adjustments from here and then start on the arms as well. All right, so let me make my adjustments just before I move on. It is a very, someone compared it to Dame Tukusugita, which is very accurate. But you know, you got to trust the process. You know, you don't want to get too complex and just confuse yourself by trying to do too many things at once. You want to start simple, and when you start simple, it might look a little silly for a bit. So let's move her torso forwards a bit. The way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to move the actual keyframes, but you can also just position them, you know, in the frame 0, 15, and 30. But I'm just going to take the actual keyframes and move them up like that, which should move the entire character at once. It's about where I think it should be. It's going to always feel the weight, center of gravity and the weight will feel a little off because I need to turn the hips and body inwards and whatnot. But so we'll keep it there for now, and we'll start adding in the arms at this point. So we're going to do exactly what we just did for the legs, but mirror them so that they counterbalance the legs. So as the actual video talks about, you don't want to position your arms so that they are on the same sides like that. Very easy mistake to make. You don't want to do that because that's just not how people walk in real life. You can do that if you want your character to look silly, but generally arms are going to swing on opposite sides. I'm gonna take a swig of water. I think this is a pretty good question, so let me answer it. Where was it? Would you recommend beginners to learn 2D animation, or at least basic 2D animation, before they get to 3D animation? Generally, I would recommend anybody who's interested in learning any kind of 3D, start with, if you can, start with 2D drawing and animating skills. It's not anything that would be required at all for learning any sort of 3D concept, but it helps your eye and how you approach 3D in general. To have some drawing knowledge, have some 2D animated knowledge. I have generally seen from artists, their work is a little better whenever they have some 2D knowledge. Even basic 2D drawing ability, basic 2D animation ability, I think it always helps a lot. It helps a lot, but it's not required. If you do not need 2D animation abilities in order to get into 3D. But it does help quite a bit, more than you would think. So let's move the arms the way they should be. Again, it will look very silly for a bit. Kind of like that. And go the other way around. Now the rig I'm using, I made it, but it's not very good. So the way the rig is set up is her arm swings are going to be a little weird for a bit. Ideally, the rig that you're using, the FK arms are set up a little more cleanly so that it creates a more consistent normal swing. But the way I set this up is just the way it is. So so it's just something I gotta tone with. But you do want to have your arms in a position where you can swing them very cleanly, kind of like, let's position this a little bit so I can get a good swing, kind of like that, because you want that sweep between each frame. So let's set up the other arm to do that. We'll turn it a little bit. Like that. Right around there. Yeah, it's not quite a perfect sweep, but it'll get us most of the way there. Yeah, I think that works for us, for our purposes. Friend funny, where would someone go to learn 3D or 2D? The best resource in the way that I learned a lot of my 3D skills was actually at what at the time was called lynda.com. Now Microsoft acquired it and they called it LinkedIn Learning. It's dumb. To me, it's lynda.com. I don't like how they changed the name because it has nothing to do with LinkedIn. But if you were to look up lynda.com, lynda.com, normally it's a paid service, but and I want to make a bigger video about this, but if you get a library card, generally your library, like your local library or sometimes your college, if you go to college, or even your high school, will offer lynda.com/LinkedIn Learning as a free resource that you can use. So let me I can actually pull it up because I think a lot of people would be interested in this. So it would look something like that. Lynda.com slash LinkedIn Learning. I don't like that name, so that's just how it's going to go. But yeah, talk to your local library, look up your local library and add lynda.com on the end. And they have a lot of resources for learning 3D, learning animation, learning Blender, learning Maya, rigging, all that. It's a very, very good resource, and it's completely free through your local library. So I highly recommend it. I'll eventually make an actual video about that because I think more people should know about that. Okay, so let's do the arms for the other side. So I'm also positioning the shoulders as well, if you didn't notice. So I have the shoulders pointed inwards for the arm, front arm, and pointed backwards for the back arm, and they're going to mirror each of the legs. So this arm will match this leg's position, and this arm will match this leg's position. And then we'll do the same for the opposite side. So I'm going to select all my controls and then key all the rotation keys at frame 0 and then at frame 15. Oh, you know, also I will key them at frame 30 as well. And then at frame 15. And so do it for the other side. Move their shoulders inwards and swing like that. And then swing the other one like that. And so they're continuing to mirror each other. And because we already keyed the shoulders and the arms, both frame 0 and frame 30, they'll go back like that. So very simple, very stiff because we need to do the actual body animation. And we don't have, you know, forearm animation or hand animation, but again, we're starting very basic. And that'll get us most of the way there as is. Taylor Mitchell, it feels very validating to see someone else blocking the walk with just the foot sliding and upward movement. Yeah, I think it's generally a little easier that way, to start there rather than each individual pose, especially when you're doing a cycle. I think it's a little easier to wrap your head around. But you know, no, if whatever you're making, whatever way you do it, if it works and it looks good, I mean, who cares how it's done, right? Like, I know animators who will sort of block out the most basic positions and keys of an overall movement that looks incredibly silly, and then, you know, a couple hours later it looks fantastic. So we have basic arm animation in place, super simple. We will leave it like that for now, and then we will add in the hip and upper body movements just so it doesn't look so stiff, and then we'll come back to the arms and do the forearm kind of dragging behind and make it look a little less stiff. So frame 0, just like everything else we've done, we're going to key frame 0 and frame 30. We're going to have the hips point inwards. So your hip is going to go towards where you're walking towards, and the back of the hips is going to go backwards. Again, you can kind of think of it like a scale. And then same as the video, we'll also rotate the hips downwards a little bit so that it sort of like a scale drags the lower part of the hips downwards. Oh wait, am I doing this right? I always see, this is when I get started getting mixed up. This is why you do each one separately. Down like that. You know what, let's just do the rotation first, and then we'll take a look afterwards. My brain always gets them mixed up. So we'll do forwards. and then go back on the Y rotation, and then copy the frames over like that. A little bit too much. Let's rotate it back. We only want a little bit. The leg that goes backwards pulls the hip down is my memo. Yes, you are correct. Yeah, it's like a scale. My brain still, even with all my teachings and thinkings and whatnot, my brain always gets it mixed up. So leg that goes backwards is pulling it down. So we'll go with that. We'll trust the process, and if it looks wrong, we'll fix it. So same with the upper body, is we want it to counterbalance. So we're going to have that go forward. And it's going to look very silly because that's the way it is. Go forward like that. Key our rotations. So the hips are going forward towards the front leg, and the upper body is going forward towards the front arm. So right now that would be the red leg is forward and the blue arm is forward. And then we'll do it the other way. I probably have it a little bit too much on that first frame, if I had to guess. And then we'll copy it over. Rotate that inwards. Well, I feel like I do have this backwards, don't I? No, I don't. Yeah, okay, now we're good. You're gonna go back like that. And then forward for the front-facing arm, so it's always pointing in that direction. And then back to frame 0. Yeah, that looks good. As is, my head is not going to stay in place because I don't have world space built in right now, but let's turn that on real quick. So we'll turn on world space for our head. Some rigs don't have this. My rig is built with world space for the head, where as is right now, what I had was neck space, which it will sort of follow where the upper body is pointing. So right now the upper body is pointing to the left, so the head and neck is pointing that way, and then when it turns to the right, it'll point to the right, or her left rather. But if I turn on head follow, what I have is head follow, but it would sometimes be called head world space. Turn on world space, then it will point down the middle. It won't rotate with the upper body. So if I were to go through it, then it stays forward. It does not rotate with the upper body, which just makes it a little less stiff. So let's, just for kicks, we'll key at 0 and key at 30. And let's just do it at 15 anyways. Just for now, just so we don't forget. And then, oh, that's interesting. Let's answer that. Evan Com, would you delete object history while animating? My mentor taught me to do that for modeling, but what about animating? No. Especially if you're working with a rig that isn't referenced in. So this is some inside baseball with Maya, but you do not need to delete history. And if you are working with a rig that has a skin and everything, and it's not referenced in, if you delete history, it might delete the skinning and parts of the rig that need it to function. You really only need to delete history for modeling, UV editing, and some texture stuff. But for animating and rigging, generally you don't need to. If you're setting up like the controls for rigging, you would want to delete history and some other things. If you need to find in Maya whether or not you need to delete history, just select what you have, what you're working on, and then go, like, I'm going to just select something random. Like I'll select like the, no, actually I'll select her, her geometry. So let's like select your body geometry. So if I needed to know whether or not I needed to delete history, and this is again, and this is specifically just for Maya. This isn't really something you need to worry about for Blender. I would go to Attribute Editor, and then usually you would have tabs up here that say stuff like Polycube, or, you know, tabs that you don't recognize that have to do with these sort of different steps that you're taking as you model. When you animate, it doesn't really create history like that, so you wouldn't have tabs. But if you have tabs that say like, you know, UV, whatever, things that you don't recognize or don't think you need, then generally you would want to delete history. And D5, why do you need to delete object history in Maya while modeling? I'll get into that. I want to do a tutorial just like this one for Maya basics, and I'll get into that whenever I do that. But the gist of it is that Maya is a little different from a lot of 3D programs, mainly because it's older, honestly. Where as you work in Maya, it creates history nodes, and which basically like saves each step that you do, which allows you to like sort of modify what you've did previously and whatnot. And then every now and then you have to delete history in order to clean up what you have, because after a certain point, once you have a ton of history built up, like I'll even show you, because again, I'm going to get into this whenever I actually show you Maya. But let's say I like create a cube, right? And I cut a thing in that cube, right? Like that. So creating that cube and cutting into it are both steps that had created history. And if you see up here, I have polysplit and polycube, right? That's history. And if I were to go up to edit, delete all by type history, or delete by type history with it selected, which would be preferable so you don't delete history that you need. Delete by type history up here. So edit, delete by type history. Then that would delete those nodes. It's kind of like an undo buffer, yes. Again, this doesn't really matter for animating. If you are an animator and you're just working with rigged characters, you do not need to do that. And it's just specific to Maya, but it's important to know. And whenever we do a proper Maya tutorial, I'll get into some of that. Is it the same with Fusion 360? I don't think so. I only have a little bit of experience with Fusion 360, but I don't think it's set up that way. I think Fusion 360 has like a undo buffer, but I don't think it works in the same way. I think, but I don't know, and I don't have enough experience with it to know for sure. I've only really worked with like, sorry, my brain was getting it mixed up with Cinema 4D. Yes, it is a little bit like Fusion 360, but not in the way that gets in your way. With Fusion 360, it's kind of like built to work that way. But whenever you remove certain things you do in Maya, it can break like everything. Whereas with Fusion 360, because that program is kind of built that way, it will, if you delete something, a really old step in Fusion 360, it will generally not break anything. It'll just act like it never happened. So let me take a drink of my drink and then we'll get back into it. And yes, Bryquad Win. I'm sorry if I've completely butchered that name. Yes, this is true too. You can delete non-deforming history, but it doesn't always work. Depending on what history you have, you may have to delete all history indiscriminately. You can't just... what they're referring to is non-deforming history. Delete non-deforming history, which sometimes doesn't always work. It can depend. Maya's fickle. It's a very finicky program. Anyways, so that's all just inside baseball. I just wanted to mention it just because it's a good question, and I wanted to bring it up while it was relevant. So the way we have it set up right now, we have the arms swinging inwards, and we have the upper body counterbalancing the legs like that. So the hips are going forward and the upper body is going the opposite direction. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And these are effectively the absolute basics you would need for a walk cycle. obviously it doesn't look good. It's very stiff. That's just the way it is right now. But from here, we have the basic movements in place, so we can actually start polishing it and making it look better. One of the easiest things you can do to a walk cycle to sort of instantly improve it is I'm going to add what you would, there's lots of sort of names for it, but I would call it drag on the forearms. So if I were to, I'll do it for each arm individually, actually. Let's focus on the front arm for right now. We want the forearm to drag behind the upper arm as it sort of swings backwards and forwards. So let's say on this frame, I'm going to key it at frame 0 and then go forward a bit and have it drag behind by sort of rotating it inwards. Like that. So as it sort of swings backwards, the forearm is going to rotate up. So here's what that looks like without that. So it looks very stiff. It doesn't drag behind. And then here, let me put it back, rotate it up as it's going backwards, like that. So that just adds a little bit of drag to it. That makes it look a little nicer. And then as it goes all the way back, we're going to have it go right after the other step. So like takes that step and then go back. We're going to drag it backwards. So the front facing step is going to drag by going upwards. And then on the other step, it's going to drag by going backwards. So so the forearm rotates backwards like that. And then it goes back to normal on the last frame. So we're going to just copy it over. So again, as always, frame 0 and frame 30 should be the same. And we have that forearm dragging behind like that. And then we'll do the same for the other arm. Go on the other side, just make sure we're doing it right. Key frame 0. Have it drag backwards. It's okay to break the arm a little bit when you do this. And then as it comes up on the next step, just after frame 15 on the next step, we will have it drag forwards like that. Probably a little too much, but generally it's there. Ed K, where's my reference? My brain. I've animated a million walk cycles in my life. I'll be fine. But generally you can look up, if you just Google walk cycles, you can find a billion. Normally you would want to work with a reference, but when you've animated a lot of walk cycles, you're usually okay. And hi everybody who's coming in. So we'll copy this back over. And just a little bit of drag on the forearms just adds a little bit more character to it. So we added some drag to the forearms and it adds a lot already. Still looks goofy, but that's okay. We'll trust what we have. And I want to just adjust this a little bit, I think. No, actually, that looks good, and then we'll do it for the other one. Yeah, maybe. No, actually, I think I'll leave that as is. Also, my knees are pointing funny. I need to push those inwards a bit. Right around there. Otherwise, oh yeah, this is a problem with my rig in general. It's something I gotta fix is my knees are, I gotta adjust them. They'll just go inwards as she walks, but it's an easy fix. So let me do that real quick. Because we, as is with this rig, they'll go outwards like that as the as the leg is going backwards. So we don't want that. So I'll do it for frame 0 and frame 30. And then we probably have to do the same for the other knee. We'll keep them front facing. That's just with my rig because I'm bad at what I do. So ignore me. Just fixing it for future reference. Yeah, so let's I think at this point we can adjust the legs a little bit more so they stretch outwards. Yeah, like that's way too short as is right now. So let's push it out because we want it to really be like a fully straightened out leg. We don't want it to be too close to the body or too bent too much. For the front facing leg that's taking a step, you really want it to be fully straightened out if you can, or close to fully straightened out. And then the back leg should be bending quite a bit. You really want like a good contrast between the two legs. Let's also turn off my curves here. There we go. And then maybe move this back because on this pose, the knee's a little too forward. So maybe we can push it backwards a bit. Then right around here. Yeah, it goes forward a little too fast, so we're going to push this backwards as well. Because on the, again, this is when we start to think about the main walk cycle poses. Contact down, pass up, contact. On the pass pose, we don't want the knee to be too far forward. It should be just, the knees should be around the same level and sort of passing each other. Right around there. Something like that. Okay, I think that's generally where we want it to be. Let's take another look at it. Might be a little fast. We, like I said earlier, we are starting with a 1 second walk cycle, 0 to 30, but we might adjust the actual timing on everything. And it looks like I have one key. Yeah, so right as is, this is why you want to make sure every now and then frame 0 and frame 30 are the same. We'll just copy that over. Right now the leg key is different on frame 0 compared to frame 30. So I'll move that over, copy it just like that. So frame 0 and frame 30 should be the same. Mouse function, do you usually animate in 30 FPS or 24 FPS? So all the Doodley videos are in 30 FPS for work. Because I work in mobile game industry, I usually animate at 60 FPS actually. And that's kind of what I'm used to. And typically you'll see a lot of TV animation movies being 24 frames a second. I like the look of 30 frames a second personally. I like animating on 3s at 30 frames a second. I don't know. I think it looks nice. Sort of that 10 frames a second look, but generally I try to animate on 30 FPS, but it's a choice. I mean, whatever you want to do. I think 24 frames a second for me is just a little bit off. I like animating at 30, so but that's just personal preference. Okay. So this is about where I'm all right with it. It's getting there. So at this point, another way you would want to add just a little bit of polish and a little bit more to the animation in a very easy way is I like to make the arms sort of delayed just by like a frame or two behind the main leg motion. But when it comes to cycles, that can be a little bit complex because with all of your animation controls and everything. Hold on one second. Let me load up my picker. This is an animation picker. If you've never dealt with one, don't worry about it. But it helps me choose controls. I'll leave it on screen just for a second. So when it comes to cycles, you don't generally want it can get very complex to have certain things loop very cleanly. But a very easy way to sort of delay the arms and have them still loop cleanly, because as is, if we were to take all of the arm controls like this, so I have all my arm controls selected. If I were to just move them over, it wouldn't work, obviously, because I just moved all the keyframes over. It's a cycle, so 0 to 30, you know, it's going to be different, and the first few frames aren't going to have any animation to it. So what we'll do instead is we'll loop all of our keys. So I'm going to select all my controls, and this will be different depending on what animation program you're in. But I will select all of my keys, and in Maya at least, you can do it one of two ways. You can loop it with pre-infinity cycle like that, and post-infinity cycle like that. There's probably a specific way to do it in Blender. Do it that way. But generally what you want is that it just loops infinitely forever. So if I were to keep going off of the actual range that I have, it will just continuously loop forever. And you just want to make sure when you do something like that, that all of your keys are start and end at the same place, or all of your keys for each control are the same length. So right now we know that our arm controls and our arm keys are 30 frames long. So if we were to take all of our arm keys and delay them by, say, 2 frames, because the entire loop is 30 frames and we just move them over, frame 0 and frame 30 are still the same. But because it's delayed a little bit, it just looks a little bit more natural. Like, it's not like all the keys are starting and ending at the same spot. I think it looks a little silly right at the moment because I need to do some more polish. But it's contrast that with this, where all of the keys are starting and ending at the same point. It feels like it just stops for a second, right? And also I could also have my key or my range end just a frame early, so it loops back to frame 0 at the same time, but that's a whole other thing. But you can see that like hitch, right? You can have it feels like it just stops for a second. Whereas if I take all of my arm keys and delayed them by 2 frames, I still have some work to do on the arms, but if I just delay them, then you can't really feel that loop point, right? It's not as obvious. It's just a small little thing that makes it a little easier to hide the loop in your cycle. And you could do that for basically anything, as long as all of your keys start and end within 30 frames, or basically whatever length your animation is. In our case, it's a 30 frame walk cycle. So this is a VOD, or it is a stream, and this will just be cut out of the actual video. But if you're watching the VOD, ignore what I'm about to say. But chat is just I don't have it on screen. I mean, there is a chat replay, but there is a lot of children in chat. But it doesn't matter, because, you know, with chat not on screen, all that matters is the actual questions I answer and whatnot. So But how's everybody going? How's it going? Are you guys having fun? Is this interesting? Good. Okay, sweet. I'm doing good. I'm still learning the best way to do these streams, which is why I'm doing something simple and learning what these streams are like. Eggy toast. I'm uncomfortable with the amount of children, but I'm okay. Yeah, it's I don't want to just like remove people indiscriminately. And it doesn't really matter in the end whenever the actual final video won't have the chat on screen. So, it's no big deal. All that's going to matter in the end is the actual questions I answer. But if people really want me to, I can say like, hey, you gotta be 16 plus to actually chat. And if you start talking about your age and whatever, I'm gonna kick you out, or at least kick you out of chat. And meeting with your stream in the background makes me feel like I'm working with someone. So yeah, having a great time. Okay, sweet. Feels like a class, a good class. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point, is I want it to be a class. Or class-ish, obviously it's free and I can't like individually cater to everybody's needs and questions, but I try to do what I can. I just joined, but this is highly educational. Good. Came here for a stream that talks about how to do a walk cycle, but all I got was, yeah, I mean, that's going to be the way chat is, but whenever it's actually turned into a video, it's not going to matter. So you could just ignore chat. Like, as long as it's not on screen and it's not going to end up in the actual video, who cares? Will there be homework? No. All right, let's get back to it. So VOD watchers, you can come back to this point. All right, let's get back into it. So we have all of this so far. I probably need to adjust. Yeah, my arms swing a little bit too much. So let's adjust that real quick. And then for our looped curves, because, so like in our curves at the moment, we have this like hitch here. In Maya, typically you can just select both the first and last key and then spline it. And it will smooth that out for you. So you don't have that hitch, or as obvious of a hitch, whenever the actual keys repeat. So we'll do it for the same for this. So select the first and last keys in our delayed arm keyframes, and then we'll spline it. So whenever we spline it, it'll be a much cleaner loop. So it doesn't always, it's not, in Maya at least, it's not always perfect. I need to adjust this key so it's a little bit better. Oop, not the, we don't want to affect any other keys. But we want it to just like not have a hitch in the actual final loop. Like that. Maybe we'll polish it from there afterwards, but yeah. But we just want to avoid that hitch. Ooh, I removed my time slider. Don't do that. Oh, Lord. Oh, I hate it when this happens. I gotta lock my workspace. There we go. So her arms are probably being raised up a little bit too much. So I'll move that down. Move that down. Ravioli cooker. Half of the chat is more focused on talking rather than learning. Yeah, I mean, it's kids. I expected a good amount of people that aren't actually doing anything in program, which is fine. I wasn't like, it's YouTube and it's public, that's kind of how it is. But it's what I can offer. And whenever it's actually turned into a video, it's not gonna be a big deal. Garrido skill. Is splining different from tweening? No, tweening is mainly just referring to interpolation. So you have one key in here, like it's effectively going from this key to this key and filling in the difference. Splining is more affects what the curve looks like. So this curve is, if you don't know a lot of 3D animation, curves are effectively representations of how an object or a control or whatever is moving in space. So this is like this curve represents the rotate Z position of this part of the arm. And if I were to like take one of the keys, I'm on frame 9, and if I were to take the key that's on frame 9 and I move it up and down, you can see how it's going to rotate on the curve editor and whatnot. Or say for frame 2, if I were to move that up and down, it rotates it. And then between those two keys, it's going to interpolate or tween, like you would call it, between those two keys. Whereas splining is basically a way to describe the curve between those keys, or a way a way to describe tweening, where if I were to say right now it's the curve is set to auto, where it'll try to find the best way to rotate those keys and rotate that curve and adjust effectively this control. Then splining is effectively changing what that looks like. It's only going to do it a little bit, but if I were to say move it over like this and move it up, just for demonstration purposes, and then change it from auto keys to spline, it's going to change that sort of more dramatically. Even more so if I had it right next to each other. Still a little bit, but you know, it's going to try and splining is effectively like takes into account, it's a curve that takes into account the sort of speed and distance of the previous key whenever it adjusts the curve itself. If that makes sense. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's basically just a way to describe the curve. So it's like we can affect the tween by splining. Yes. So spline is a way to describe a key, but yeah, that's effectively what I mean. And thank you for your question. Yeah, all of these are basically ways to affect the curves themselves. So, you know, for example, you have like stepped keys, which will change the curve so that it stays consistent up until it meets the next key, and then it drops down immediately. So like after frame 9, it stays where it is. This is such a funny example with her arm, but after frame 9 or after frame 21, it immediately jumps to the next key. Whereas linear keys are going to go at a consistent speed until it meets the next key. So because this is an auto key, an auto curve, it's going to slowly move into that key's curve, which is set to auto, but this key's on linear, so it's going to consistently move. So yeah, graph editor stuff, it takes a while. I can do a whole thing on graph editor stuff, honestly. The graph editor itself is just a big part of 3D animation in general, and you just slowly start to learn it. Once you begin to separate each rotation or position channel as individual curves, then it makes a little more sense. Like this purple curve is describing her forearm rotation, like that. You know, I make changes to that, it affects that rotation. Once you start to sort of get a feel for that, it's not so bad. You know, it looks scary whenever you are looking at like a bunch of different keys and a bunch of different curves, but generally if you're just affecting one curve and one controller at once, it's not that bad. Okay. So where was I? Oh yeah, I still have I still have her funny arm movements here. So I'll drag it backwards, drag the forearms forwards, just like that. And we have a bit of delay in the arms, so it will just be a little more out of sync. So the arms are a little more out of sync with the legs, just to make it a little bit more natural. And as is right now, I'd say just looking at it, our upper body is maybe a little bit too low. The walk's pretty fast. The basics are in place, but you know, we can do a lot to sort of polish everything. And then we still have to do the head movement, kind of the head bobbing up and down, and you know, things like that. One thing I'm going to turn on that is built into this rig, but may not be built into whatever rig you use, is I have, and this is default to M Gear. It's not something I'm like a genius that set up or anything. It's just a basic feature of M Gear. So it's not like anything impressive. So don't be like, whoa, that's such a nice, that's a cool thing. Is there's a feature in M Gear, in M Gear's IK legs called softness, where as is my legs have a lot of IK pop to them. So whenever the legs bend, so let's say I have the leg in this position and I move it upwards like that, like right around here, it's stretching, right? Like as I move it up and down, right? But as I move it up, slowly, 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 there's that pop, right? And it's nasty. So that setting in the IK legs, which I get by selecting this control for my rig, is softness, which fixes that. So if I were to set that to 0.5, let's do it for the other leg as well. So let's set the IK softness to 0.5. And we now stretch the leg up. There's no more of that IK pop. So it's a much more natural sort of leg extension than before. So if I were to keep going like that, then you don't have like the character's like legs constantly bouncing. So just to sort of demonstrate, right now the IK softness is on. So that's what it looks like with the IK softness on. And then let's turn it off just so you can see what it looks like off. So it should be off for both legs, and this is what it looks like when it's off. You kind of see how the leg is bouncing, especially the blue leg, like the front leg. That's what that fixes. So that's IK softness off. And that's with it on. So it helps a lot. So that's a good question. Yeehaw, why doesn't every rig have that? Because it's complicated. It's a lot of math stuff. Even I don't know how to do it. It's a default feature in M Gear, and it is very useful. I assume it has something to do math-wise with determining the distance from a default IK position, whatever. It doesn't matter. But it does take a little bit of setup. So your average, because IK is very easy to set up for most programs, but those sort of additional features are a little bit more complex. But I just want to make that note. If you're working with a IK or a rig that has IK legs, and it's like at least somewhat professionally built, then that is sometimes built into it, and it helps a lot. Okay, so that's just another little polish thing. I'm starting to feel like I pushed her upper body forward a little bit. Let me try pushing it back. Maybe a little bit too far back. Because I kind of want it in the center. It's also maybe the front leg needs to be a bit forward. Whenever I animate walk cycles, it tends to... I tend to have this problem of going back and forth on the legs distance between each other and the distance from like the center of the character and whatnot. And you kind of just have to accept at a certain point that it's not perfect. So let's position it a little bit and see what happens. Yeah, I think her back leg could do with going back a little bit more. And then we'll, you know, I think I like that actually. Something like that. Yeah, that looks good. Let's move her upper body a bit more forward. And yes, don't forget to save often. I actually do need to save myself. So let's do that real quick. So let's move her upper body just forward a little bit, and then we'll do some more polish on the hands and fingers and whatnot. Maybe about there-ish. You know what? Actually, we'll do, we'll have her a little bit back a little bit on the, on this position, and then move the upper body forward a little bit on that position, because the balance feels a little bit off the other way around. Yeah, that feels pretty good. It's just so the center of gravity stays the same. So Brequad when working with Maya, save your files in .ma, not in .mb. It's very important. So this was generally a thing that mattered more a while ago with Maya, but generally it doesn't matter anymore. The only difference between MA and MB these days, the difference between MA and .mb files is that MA is raw, right? It's a raw file versus .mb, which compresses it. But these days it doesn't, at least in my experience, I very rarely ever see the difference. You know, I work with .mb files all the time, and I very rarely see crashes anymore. I think generally all the kinks that have to do with MB files have been worked out. So I think if you're working in older versions of Maya, I would recommend that. But generally these days, I've not had any real issues with the difference of MA.mb files, just as a general note. I think if hard drive space matters to you at all, then or if hard drive space doesn't matter to you, then MA files would be better because they're uncompressed. But you generally otherwise don't want, you know, 100 different files that are all .ma and they're all uncompressed. If you can work in .mb, you should. If it doesn't result in crashes and corrupted files. And in my experience, generally I don't end up with corrupted files or crashes as a result of .mb files. So yeah, just a small little thing. It's something that mattered 10 some years ago with Maya, but since then Autodesk has made tons of improvements to that sort of thing, and it doesn't tend to matter these days. So at least in my experience. Oh yeah. Yeah, the big thing is that you can edit the .ma file with a text editor and try to fix issues with it outside when a file gets corrupted. Yes, correct. That is true, and that would be a good benefit to it. So if you want to plan ahead for something like that, especially if you're working with much more complicated files than what I'm dealing with, you know, if you're working with game files, very simple characters, very simple rigs and skeletons and whatnot, you know, your files are very rarely ever going to get corrupted because it's not working with a lot of data. But I have opened up Maya files that were .mb that had tons of stuff in them, and yeah, they were very complex, and you couldn't do anything to them because they were compressed in .mb files. But generally, 99% of people, especially when you're an independent animator and you're not working with a lot of files and not working with a lot of characters and complex scenes, yeah, you can work with .mba and .b or .ma files, or you can work with .mb files just fine. Yeehaw, how long have you been animating? You really know your stuff. In terms of 2D animation or just animation in general, I've been animating since I was a kid. In terms of 3D stuff, I started doing and getting into 3D since 2017, so not that long ago, but the difference with me is that since 2017, I basically have been doing it like every day. So like literally every day. So it's, so I, at this point, have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of hours in Maya, or whatever the math would be on that, where it just has been my job to know how a lot of Maya works and know every step of the process when it comes to 3D stuff. So not too long for 3D stuff, about 7 years of experience, but like 6 years or 5 years of those experience are in professional workspaces as a generalist. So, okay. That's a good question. While we're on the subject, because obviously this can all go to the end. Windy Fan, I like your approach to informative animation learning content. Thank you. Will you ever cover more general info like stuff about storyboarding, creative block? Yeah. So especially when it comes to storyboarding, before I got into 3D, I thought I wanted to be a storyboard artist. And so I have a pretty good bevy of knowledge for that sort of thing. I don't have professional experience in it, but I certainly have friends in the storyboarding industry that I can talk to, and some general ideas of it. And I've made short films, and I love storyboarding. So I eventually want to make storyboarding videos. At the time, there's a lot I want to do first because there's not a lot of good quality information out there on certain subjects that I want to cover first, just so there's something out there for those subjects, like rigging, for example. But eventually I do want to get into storyboarding and whatnot because it is very passionate to me. And thank you, Absolute Clear. Okay, let's get back to it. So let's curl the fingers inwards. So my rig has a metatarsal control. Just a bit like that, which if you don't know in hand bones, all your fingers have 3 joints, but you also have an additional joint called a metatarsal that kind of defines the curve of your palm as you like grip something. And usually when you relax your hand, you are curving the metatarsals inwards a bit. So that's what this control does. It's pretty typical with more professional rigs. And if I were to curve it inwards, you kind of get a nice natural curve in the fingers like that. And then we'll select all of our finger controls and curve them inwards like that. And then we'll do the same for the thumbs. The way my thumbs are set up, it's a little jank, but I can still get a good sort of natural position like that. And then we'll do the same for the other fingers. So we'll curve those inwards. And then we'll do the same for the metatarsals. And then curve the thumb inwards like that. Now we have some more, like a more natural position for our fingers. And at this point, we'll also adjust the hands and turn them inwards, because generally when you walk, you are turning your palms towards the body themselves. So if I were to take this like that and position the hand like this, we'll key that. Oh, you know what? I also have to, let's just while we're at it, let's key everything. So whichever way you do it, select all your controls. Oh, you know, I don't want to do that actually, because then we'll do it for the arms as well. So let's do instead, since we just affected our fingers, let's select all our fingers and thumbs, key all that, and then go to frame 30 and copy those frames over. And now frame 0 and 30 should be the same. Great. And for the hands, we curve the hands inwards. And at frame 0, curve the hand into the body. That looks good throughout, so we'll leave it at that. But just like we did with the forearms, we'll have it drag behind the forearm and the upper arm. Like that. I'll curve it inwards a little bit more. So as it's being dragged backwards, the hand will sort of curve upwards. And then as it's being dragged forwards, we'll curve it backwards, like that. Great. Yeah, so we just have a bit of drag between, we have a bit of drag in the hand, which adds a lot to it. It just sort of makes it feel a lot more natural, especially with regards to the fingers and whatnot. So let's do the same for the back hand, or the right hand. So this is already more or less curved inwards. Let's see. Yeah, let's have it about there. And then we'll do the same on frame 30. And then from the first step, go forward a few frames, have it drag backwards a bit. A little bit more, I think. I feel like this is a little bit awkward, but we'll see what it looks like once we're done. And then, yeah, it's turned inwards a little bit too much, I think. Hold on, let me adjust here. Something like that. Let's try it out. Okay, curve backwards. So as the arm itself is dragging it forwards, the hand drags backwards a bit. And yeah, it's curved a little bit too much. It kind of looks like it's being cupped, right? So we'll curve it backwards. It's probably just a result of my rig itself, but we'll curve it downwards, which might not look great. This is the struggle of making a rig that does not have clean rotations. Let's rotate it inwards. Yeah, let's something like that. And then as it's want to swing upwards. As it's being dragged backwards. Yeah, a bit like that. Something like that. So each hand is dragging backwards as the arm is sort of swinging, which adds a lot to sort of the natural feeling of it. You know, the arms and hands don't feel as stiff whenever they are actually swinging alongside the rest of the arm. You know, they're not like stiffly kind of staying in place as the arm swings itself. It's actually dragging behind. So a lot of that's in place so far. We're pretty far along at this point. So I'd say what we need at this point is just a bit of bobbing in the head, the upper body, and the lower body. And we also want to turn and counterbalance the upper body a bit. So let's do that real quick. This feels like it might be turned inwards a little bit too much. So let's turn that back a bit. Then We're going to counterbalance the hips by turning turning the hips the other direction. I was doing the wrong way. Go this way, just a little bit. You don't want it as much as the hips. Then we'll copy that over. And then turn it back. So, oh, I never did it for the, I never did the hips in the other direction, did I? Yeah, that should be, or at least they weren't as exaggerated as I would want it to be. But yeah, the hips should be rotated upwards, with the other side of the hips dragging it downwards. And the upper body is counterbalancing it. So if the hips are facing upwards like this, then the upper body's in the other direction. Yeah, don't forget to invert the hips. Yeah. Yeah, do I have it wrong? I can, my brain is always terrible at getting them right. I think that might be the other way around for sure, isn't it? This will be made into a video, yes. Yeah, I'm going to give it to an editor and it will be chopped up for a main video. Okay, this should be right to me. Obviously the upper body's sort of leaning to one side a little bit too much, but we can fix that. Yeah, leg that straightens pushes the hip upwards, if that makes sense. Okay, then I have it right. That's what I thought. It felt right to me. Yeah, I just like everybody else, I get that mixed up all the time myself, so. But yeah, just as long as you have that going downwards, then the upper body should be counterbalancing it. So right now she has a little bit of swagger, which is kind of funny looking, but that's okay. Looks good. So at this point, we're going to take the upper body, and instead of a rotation, we're actually going to start messing with the position of it. So my upper body control, this will differ from whatever rig you use. It's not going to be the same for every rig. And we're going to affect the position of it. Seems like the feet kind of slow down when they reach the end of their stride on the floor instead of moving fully linearly. Yeah, that is a struggle that even I tend to hit sometimes with my walk cycles, is that balance of the sort of foot roll and positioning of the legs versus sort of a clean. Yeah, it's some curves and polish that you want to do afterwards. So you would want to, for example, have it sort of hit the ground more linearly, kind of like this. So if I were to change that curve so it's a linear curve and it's going continuously till like that, so it doesn't slow down at all when it reaches that point, by changing it to a linear key. It's a little bit nicer, and then the foot roll can be done the same way, like that. Then it feels a little more natural. Obviously we'll do a lot of that in the sort of polish stage, but that's just a small thing that will add a lot to it. And then, yeah, there is a balance with the feet sort of slowly moving backwards that we'll mess with as we go along. Like once this hits the ground, it should be immediately moving backwards. Right now it's not. I believe if we change this to a linear key, it should start moving backwards the moment it hits the ground. Right? Like if right now as the front foot in blue meets the ground like that. And let's actually create a floor here, by the way, just so we know what we're working with. As it sort of meets the ground like that, as is, it sort of slows down before it starts advancing backwards. But in a regular cycle, you would want it to immediately start moving backwards. So if we were to change that to a linear key, like that, then the moment it hits the ground, it'll start moving backwards. But there's a balance to it. You don't want it, because it doesn't feel quite right if it immediately starts moving backwards. At least to me. I think it should, like, the foot should fully hit the ground first before it does that. So we maybe move the foot roll key downwards, a bit like that. But yeah, it's just a little bit of polish things that we'll mess with as we go along. So hopefully that kind of helps answer your question. Real quick, Pixel Crafting. Hi. Trying to see more animation stuff like you've been making, and the stuff you make is awesome. Love the recent upload, and I wish I could stay to watch this, but it's 2, almost 3 a.m. Yeah, go to bed. Thank you for stopping by. I appreciate your comment. I thought it was cool to see. So thank you. Let's do that to the other foot real quick, just so we don't lose our progress here. So we're going to select the foot roll and have it. I just realized this foot would be on the first few frames, so let's snap that downwards. And for the translate Z keys as it's going backwards, we'll have it immediately start going backwards. And then we'll mess with that as it goes along. But further than that, yeah, there's a jump there that I just don't like. And this would be when I would start, or doing this would be more so in a polish stage. So I think I'll push the foot roll controls forward a bit, and then we'll move on and go back to what I was going to do with the upper body. What program is this? This is Maya, Autodesk Maya 2023. But if you're new, use Blender. Maya costs money, and it costs a lot of money. So let's mess with the upper body here. So same principles that we had with the arms dragging behind the upper body and the upper arms movement. We'll do the same with the upper body and the hips so that they sort of bounce a little bit. So if this is close to the top of a step, then right after the step is taken, we will position the upper body, this control, so that it goes downwards a bit. Again, your rig might not have a control like this to sort of position the upper body in its entirety. But we'll make it work. So we'll move this down a little bit. Oh, I need to actually key my translates. So frame 5 or 6, we'll move it down. So it kind of bounces and moves downwards, and then about frame 13, 14-ish, just before that next step, we'll move it upward. And then we'll do the same for the next step. So if we do it right, we might have to exaggerate it a little bit. Brequad win almost 4 a.m. here. I'm going to call it a night. It's been a pleasure working with your stream on the side while working, learning, and helping out. Have a good one. Have a good one yourself. Thank you for your questions and your comments, man. It's always good to talk to other people who also work in Maya. So yeah, have a good night, man. So we have the upper body translate keys. I think, so I kind of go back and forth on doing this, but I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to have a key that moves upward just after the step. So if I'm on frame 0, I move to frame 2 and move it upwards a bit. Then you kind of have the upper body dragging a little bit. So right around there. And then it snaps downwards. And then we'll do the same to this one. Have it a few frames after the second step, or even on the actual step. And then after the step, it moves downwards. Just so you get that bounce after each step. Copy our keys over from frame 0 to frame 30. And then we'll move this over and push the torso or upper body down as the step is taken. So does that look about right? No, I don't quite like that. I think I want to adjust this a bit. No, I think that looks a little too stiff for me. Let's remove those keys that we made earlier. I think we'll just delay them instead. But basically the end result that we want is a very exaggerated like position with the upper body to have it sort of bounce after each step. Just adds a little bit to some of the life of it. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. You can kind of see it in the sort of spine compression. It sort of stretches upwards as the during the up pose in the walk cycle. And then we'll do the same for the hips. So in between each step, we're going to move it downwards. Oh, I need to key my positions, frame 0 and frame 30. Key it downwards. And then around frame 15 or just afterwards, we'll key it a bit upwards. Maybe a little bit more. And then just after that step, key it downwards. Get that stretch, and then it should have that sort of bounce to it. It's a little too low. Let's move it up a bit. Oop, too much. Okay, pretty good. And then we want to position it so that the hips are moving left and right with each step. So since I already have the position or translate keys in place, I'm just going to take my graph editor and position them where I need them to be. So on these frames, we'll move it, do frame 0 and frame 30, we'll move it to the left. Delete these keys, and then frame 15, we'll move it to the right. Something like that. Still feels a little too stiff to me, so I might have to do a bit more to it. But it's almost there. I also have to do a bit with the head. Some of the stiffness is probably in the head, so let's start on that. Is being a generalist harder than being a specialist in the industry? I'd say like if you're trying to find work, I think it's generally better to be a specialist, because I think it's better to have a focused portfolio for what you do. Generalists in the industry are mostly useful for like small teams and or studios that make a lot of small projects. So for example, like studios that make commercials. A lot of generalists work at studios that make commercials because they work on a lot of smaller projects that all have their own individual teams. So having like a lot of different abilities helps a lot of different projects. But if a studio like a game studio or an animation studio, they need a specific skill set, they're going to be looking for people who only do that specific skill set, and it can be like hyper specific. So that said, I think it's better to be a specialist by trade, but a generalist overall, if that makes sense. Like you want to bill yourself as specialized in a specific field, but you are capable of doing every other step. It's just not your focus. Like say you're good at animation, you bill yourself as an animator, but you're also capable of modeling, rigging, animating, whatever, which will look more attractive on a resume, if that makes sense. That's the way I see it. I think it's a little easier being a generalist maybe in theory, but I think overall it's better to bill yourself as a specialist, as a specialist of one specific job. At least in my experience. And it can depend on what industry you're in. So let's do the head bobbing. So same with the hands, we're just gonna have it drag behind. So goes downwards, it drags upwards. Very simple stuff. And then just after the position in that step, so right when the sort of upper body stops for a moment, then we'll start to drag downwards, because the head bobbing is sort of going to react to the sudden stop of the upper body positioning. So as it's going downwards, drag upwards. As it's going upwards, drag downwards. And then we'll spline our keys so they loop cleanly. Head bobs are maybe a little dramatic, but we'll live with it. Move them over a bit. Something like that. Yeah, a bit too dramatic, I'd say. Let's tone it down a little bit. We just want a little bit of head bob. You don't want it to feel like the neck is too loose. And you know what? Let's also do it to the neck itself. I have a bad habit of not animating necks as much as I should, honestly. But let's just do just a little bit, just so it affects the position of her head. Try that again. Back as it's going down. Forward as it's going up. Back as it's going down. Forward as it's going up. You know what? No, actually that looks good. Let's do that. Let's see how that looks. It's a little bit too exaggerated probably, but I think we can generally leave it like that. Yeah, I think it moves backwards a little bit too much. And probably too early as well, I'd say. Let's loop these and then delay them a little bit. Yeah, think that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, great. Do you think it's more important when looking for work to be technically skilled or creative? Like both are important, but which do you think is priority? So I'd say it's easier to find work if you are technically skilled. Creative industries, creative jobs in the industry are both very niche and specific. And you have to be really, really good at them to get a job in those fields. Whereas with technical work, technical jobs like tech art, rigging, simulations, VFX, all that, which can be creative industries, creative jobs, but they're much more common. It's much easier finding work because studios constantly need people who can rig, who can do simulations and all these other like smaller, technically complex skills. So I'd say it's easier to find a job in a technical skill, but depending on how you feel about those technical skills, you might not be as happy. Is the industry as bad as they say? I myself want to start working at indie studios, pursue my concept artist career, and I'm scared the industry would present problems like looking for a stable job. AAA industry, pretty bad. Don't, if you can avoid it, don't bother with the AAA industry. Not every studio is like that, but I think generally you don't want to be involved with AAA studios. But indie studios, not so bad. You kind of make the trade-off of not being paid super well because it's indie studios, but when you work in smaller teams that are close-knit, then you are respected more and you know who you're working with. It's less of a grind. People care about your health more. Just a little bit nicer, but you don't get paid as much. You can get paid pretty good in some AAA jobs, depending. Not always, but depending. The exception to that is the mobile game industry is very comfortable. You're not working on anything glamorous, but you get paid well and you have a good work-life balance. Generally, most mobile game studios I've both heard at and the ones I've worked at are very chill. And in the animation industry, children's animation is very chill. You don't tend to have a lot of crazy expectations on you when you work in children's animation and in mobile game studios. So I would say the industries can be as bad as you say, or as bad as they say, but it's in my experience, it tends to be mostly just in AAA games. So I'll answer one more thing and then I'm gonna get back to it. And that's just seeing a lot of companies, studios prefer people going for people who have skills in Maya rather than Blender. Actually, I've kind of seen it these days be like 50-50. I've been handed on projects a lot of Blender files in my time, and I've introduced Maya to a lot of people who work in Blender. Generally, when I see job listings, it tends to be a mix of Maya and Blender skills. I think usually in more independent and smaller teams, they tend to use Blender. Teams that don't do a lot with 3D tend to use Blender. It's mostly in those, like I said, the AAA studios and whatnot that you work in Maya. And that's just because they have entire infrastructures that are built around Maya. And that's why they want you to use Maya. Because if, like, let's say they use Motion Builder is an Autodesk program, you can't really transfer a lot of that over. Or they work a lot with FBX files, which is an Autodesk file format. It's not really, the animation skills transfer, but it's more of a problem with the entire studio is basically built around some of these programs. So they can't really ask you, or you can't really bring Blender into it. Now, if you are very skilled at what you do, like you're the best animator ever, but you can't use Maya, they might train you and it's worth applying anyways, or you can just take one or two Maya classes and just learn the basics and then just say you have Maya experience, which is not untrue. and then you learn a lot of it on the job. So that's the way I see it. Oh yeah, good question, because I do tend to see these days a good amount of balance between Blender and Maya asks. So let's finish this up. I think we're pretty close, honestly. And I didn't want this stream to go too far over 2 hours. So I think we're about there. So let's do the polish we wanted to do on the legs. And then, so I think just by looking at it, let's go frame by frame here, actually. So I could probably delay the upper body movement just a smidge, which would probably help the sort of that downward movement as the character is taking a step. And we'll also spline the keys on 0 and 30. Just like that. And then we'll move it over. Maybe just a frame. See how that looks. Yeah, I think that looks good. Just one frame over. I think looks pretty good. Her second step is a little too high. So let's lower that. Yeah, it's much higher than the first step. So it's a bit lower now. And I think we'll rotate her body inwards. Like that. Key that, then go to frame 30 and key that. So it loops. And yeah, if you were to if you were to flip between frame 0 and 15, 15 being frame 0 being our first step and 15 being our second step, these are pretty well mirrored, which is generally what you want. You want them to be pretty good mirrors of each other, each pose. Yeah, that feels pretty good. So let's check if we have that good that snap we want in the legs. Yeah, and we don't want the leg to slow down too much. We want it to slow down a little bit because otherwise it'll look a little weird, but slowing down a little too much, which might look weird in a cycle. Because if it's a cycle and they're sort of moving forward at a consistent pace, you don't want it to you don't want the feet to slow down at some point, because their feet should be ideally connected to the ground. You know, they're stuck. So let's see if we can't fix that. I think we'll just try a linear key on that backwards movement, which should be this translate Z curve. No, that's kind of what I mean. Is I want it to let's do a separated key. So it's going to go at a consistent pace, front to back. So right now we want it to frame 0 to 15. Excuse me, let me get some water. So frame 0 to 15, go backwards at a consistent pace, and then we want it to sort of slowly go forward because it's being lifted off the ground. So instead, we'll separate these keys out with this, split them. So on the right side of this curve, we can have it go a little slower as it comes off. Yeah, about that. I think that looks good. And then, so frame 0 to 15, it's going at a consistent pace, but as it's coming off the ground, it goes a little bit slowly before it peels off the ground entirely. Because by default, if they were linear on both sides, then it would just go at a linear pace and then immediately start going forward, which looks a little bit unnatural. So instead, we'll have it slowly go forward a bit. Like that. And then I think for the translate keys, we'll do the same thing. We're going to make these linear keys. So when it's coming off the ground, it's slow. But when it's hitting the ground, it's going at a consistent pace. Like that. Looks good. And then we'll do the same for the other foot. So translate Y keys as it's being lifted up. Oh yeah, it's linear. We already did that. And then translate Z keys. We will have it going linear, going upwards. Oh wait, not for that one. We want it for this side. Yeah. Pretty good. Yeah, so for a cycle, that will be pretty clean. It'll feel like it's sticking to the ground rather than slowing down each side. So that's most of it in place. I think the up and down movement's a little too dramatic for me, so I might reduce it. And I think I want it to reach that highest point for a more consistent amount of time. Oh yeah, this is really high actually. Let's lower that a bit. Both sides. So I'm going to try and make the upper body movement a little more dramatic. Push this back. So it's a really big snap as it's moving downwards. Like a whoosh, like that. And then it holds that higher position for a bit longer by having two keys. Kind of keep it at that high position. Let's see how that looks. So at this stage, it's pretty much just trying things out and experimenting to see what looks best. Yeah, it's too fast, I think, for that frame, but for the other one, it looks pretty good. So we'll try to keep that consistent. Yeah, it's too sharp of a drop. Let's take a look at that. But it's almost there. Maybe around here. Then push that back. Ooh, don't like that. Maybe around these keys. Yeah, that feels great. Okay, that's much better. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot at this point. Got the foot roll. We can make the foot roll more dramatic. In my rig, I can set it up so that the foot roll has angles it meets before it starts to peel off the ground. I'm going to set those. That's in this rig. It's each angle is basically affects the amount it rolls. So, for example, it was set to each angle was set to 20, which was this is a complicated rig thing that is not in a lot of rigs. But right now the foot roll is set up so that it starts to peel off the ground after a certain point, and that feature in the rig affects like at what point does it start to peel off the ground. So I'm going to set it to 45 each and see how that looks. So it should have a sharper like turn in the foot with that value being higher. And then we'll do the same for the other foot. Yeah, just so it has a little bit more of an obvious foot roll to it. Okay, I think one more thing we'll do, that and the ponytail, is I'm going to add a blink to it. So I just have a super basic face rig on Gimberly. Nothing too complicated, and it just has the upper blink, or the it just has blink controls, nothing too fancy with like cheat controls or anything like that. But I like to generally have a blink at least once in my walk cycles, just because it gives a character a bit more life. Just once. Yeah. That looks a lot nicer. So I think that's pretty much in place. We'll just add a little bit of the ponytail bouncing, and then I think we'll call it. So this is obviously not relevant to every character, but you know, whatever if your character has any extra parts or things that would have follow through or drag, then it's the same as the arms and the head. You want it to drag behind the main part of the body. So let's do it on the second control here. Actually, let's do the big control that controls everything else first. So drag behind, and then up. So drag backwards, it's going down, and up. Forwards, it's going up. Just like that. And then we'll do it for the lower part of the ponytail. Because essentially what we want is, there's sort of a concept in basic 3D animation where you're animating like a pendulum, and ponytails are effectively like a pendulum. We have each different three different sections, and the further along a section is, the more drag and more delay it has as the rest of it is animating. So if the main rotation is on this frame, then we want the lower part of it to be a few frames afterwards when it comes to the rotation. So we're going to rotate that one up a few frames after this stops rotating, the higher point of it. And then same for the other direction. So it's going backwards now, and then a few frames after this control stops, we'll put a rotation frame the other way after that point. So it's going to look a little jank because I'm kind of trying out what I think will look good, and then we'll adjust from there. It's probably a little too exaggerated if I had to guess. Yeah, probably too exaggerated. Something like that. It's probably too much, so let's turn it down a little bit. So this moves too quickly. Let's loop it and delay it a little bit. So how's that look so far? It's a little bit better, but still too stiff. Let's make these first few keyframes on this a little bit farther back. move some keys over. Yeah, I don't like that. I think we have to move it backwards actually instead. Do my little undo dance. Yeah, I think I had too much drag maybe. Move these over a little bit. Okay, and then each of these sections still doesn't look quite right to me, which is why I have ponytail physics built in. So I don't have to deal with animating ponytails. It can be tough. Let's move things over a bit. That's too fast. That's about as close as my patience will let me get to it. let me reduce the second step, and then I think we'll call it there. Yeah, I probably could stretch it. That would help a lot, actually. Good point. So let's stretch it upwards as part of a drag, and then downwards as the step is taken. Yeah, that's looking better. I think that was probably part of it. Ponytails are very bouncy. Downwards, and then it should loop. Still not where I want it to be. Let's add it to this control as well, just to see if we can get a little less stiff. But I'm not going to spend too long on it. Oh, that's almost there. I just need to kill the backwards movement a bit. Almost. My patience is waning. I think we'll probably call it after that. Yeah, we have a Discord. All right, I think I'm going to call it there, and we'll just leave it being a little stiff, because this will just depend on what your character has. You know, basically just animate the any follow through or anything extra on your character, like clothes or skirts and things you want it to drag behind the actual main movement. You know, that'll depend on what you have. So this could be a little better, but I'm not gonna spend a million years messing with it. I think this is pretty much pretty happy with this. There's a lot more I could do to it to sort of polish each individual part of it, but I think for a basic walk cycle, that would be what you would start with. Yeah, there's small things like I'd probably separate the legs a little bit more. I'd curl the fingers inwards to have them drag behind. Lots of little things. But I think those would be pretty much all the steps I would do to do a very basic walk cycle. So now move her forward. Sure. Yeah, let's see how it looks. And we can also take a look at each of the individual poses, see if we have it right. So let's try that out. So all of it should be looping infinitely. Let me make sure. It could be a little funny in Maya to get that right. There we go. Oh, you know what? Except for the blink keys, I need to make sure that those are keyed at 0 and 30. Okay, and then let's have her walk forward a bit. So as long as I set up my infinite loop correctly, it shouldn't mess up. But sometimes with the way infinite loops work in Maya, it can be a little funny. So let's go forward a bit just to make sure we did it right. That looks about right. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, let's have her walk forward a bit. Maybe frame 200. Then, so it's not going to look, since we were primarily animating at this angle, it's not going to look good at every angle. You know, that would be part of the cycle, is checking at all angles to make sure it looks good at every angle and nothing's turned too much or twisted and whatnot. But oh, let me make it a linear key. That was funny. But let's give that a shot. Yeah, at certain angles it does look a little stiff. You know, the hand is turned inwards too much. Let's have her walk a bit more forward. I'm trying to sync the feet so that they stick to the ground as she's walking, which can be a balancing act. Which is why you would generally want to, if the feet are visible, you generally want to animate the character going off their control. Okay, that's pretty close. So I'll answer any other questions in just 1 minute, but let's see how that looks. Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, the hands are a little stiff as they are right now. Oh, you know what? Are the hands looping? They are not. That's why. All right, let's fix that. Ah, much better. Yeah, very good. All right, let's position our camera a bit. Then set our scene. And then just take a look at it that way. Yeah, not bad. A couple hours. Like I said earlier, I think if I were to continue this, her feet are pretty close together, I'd say. So I'd separate them a little bit more. Characters with longer legs, you know, you want them to be pretty far apart. But I think for 2 hours, the bulk of it being done in 2 hours, I think that's pretty solid. So let's answer a few questions and then we'll wrap up. Hasn't been too long, been 2 hours. So you can apply those principles in all sorts of animation styles. I might have to learn more about animation, make stuff for my game. So when it comes to the setup that we did, depending on when you came in, we were starting from the basics of just moving the feet, like sort of shuffling and sliding the feet left and right in order to work out the basic movements. That's mainly just a 3D thing, and that's just to focus on the absolute basics before we do all the other stuff. But once it gets to this stage where all of the poses are in place, and it looks generally good to me, then it's just about polishing it based on feel and based on the sort of logic that goes into pretty much any other animation you would do and basic walk cycles. So it would basically, after that point, after that setup, be the same as any other form of animation, stop motion, pixel art, 2D animation, whatever. It's just like in stop motion, for example, you have tie downs, which in stop motion, you need to keep your character's feet on the ground, but obviously there's gravity. So you literally nail or screw their feet into the ground, like they drill a hole underneath the table, and then they have bits in their feet that they can screw into the ground. Same as that. That's a setup that gets to a walk cycle, but once you're actually animating, the principles are the same. That makes sense? So same with pixel art, however way you would set that up in order to create a walk cycle, whether you animate it in 2D, whatever you need to do. There is a setup to it, but after a certain point, 3D, stop motion, pixel art, it's all just ways of creating 2D images. So all of the same general 2D animation principles apply. Where was this? Doodley, have you ever used Flipnote on the DSi and 3DS? Yeah, that was actually a lot of my animating growing up was animating on Flipnote. I did a lot of animations on Flipnote that I'll share someday. I still have them. I have them all saved. So I'll show them one of these days, but not anytime soon. I think it'll be like a anniversary thing, or a 1 million sub special or something like that. So, but yes, I have used Flipnote. Flipnote is dope. Zach, hi. The issue I have is keeping the feet planted when moving the character forward. Yeah. So I mentioned this right at the beginning of the stream. Is the trade-off of animating a cycle versus animating the character taking each step and coming off of their controls, right? So let me pause this for a second. So I mentioned this at the very beginning, but I'm going to go over it again because it is very important. So there are two ways to animate. The way we just did, where we have a cycle and we just animate the master control or the local control going forward, right? And that works okay, but obviously, and you can even see it here, the feet slide a little bit, right? Let me see if I can get really close. You can see the feet sliding just a little bit. So whenever you're animating that way, where you do a cycle and then just move the control forward, it is easier, but you make that trade-off of the feet sliding a little bit. That's why if you're animating a scene where your camera is like at this close and you don't see the feet, that doesn't matter, right? So you can just do a walk cycle. Or if you're doing it for a game, then you have to do a cycle anyways. But if you're animating a movie or a TV episode or something where the feet will be visible, then you do want to animate each step. So you would move the character forward, then move the feet forward, and then the next foot forward, so on and so forth, until they get to the position. Just so they keep their feet planted on the ground. All right, Logan. Hey, Doodley. Oh, let me also play music at this point since we're wrapping up. Be a little more chill. Sorry if you were listening to music while you were working or something like that. I just figured it'd be a little nice since we're wrapping up. Let's see. Animal Crossing music, why not? Okay. Logan, hey Doodley, I wanted to share that this is my second year learning 3D animation at my institute, and I'm about to learn rigging. My lumberman character is finally coming to life. Sweet. I'll do some stuff on rigging. I mean, doing these streams, these tutorial streams, are especially useful for rigging because a lot of people don't know rigging. It's very complicated. So hopefully I can offer a more in-depth rigging tutorial in the future. I want to make both a main video about rigging and like a full stream that goes into rigging in Maya, because I think it would be very useful for most people. Shades and ends, you look great today. Thank you. There's some earlier questions I just want to make sure I don't skip over. No, I think we're good. Okay. Gump. Do you think it's feasible to break in the industry as someone who's self-educated? I've heard answers on both ends. I have good news for you. I'm self-taught. I've learned most of my 3D stuff by myself. I'm not entirely 100% self-taught, where I basically grew up animating, and I learned a lot of my animation skills doing a lot of stuff myself. I did go to college for animation, but my college was not a 3D animation college. It was just an animation college in general. And a lot of what I did, I mean, most of my teachers were stop motion teachers. So I did a lot more stop motion than anything else. I took one class on 3D, but it was like absolute basics. And it didn't teach me anything that I hadn't already figured out myself. So I didn't take any of the other classes. It was like, there's like 4 classes and I just didn't take any. So yeah, a lot of what I learned is self-taught. And a lot of it is just using it every day, trying things out, giving myself lots of projects. I mean, it's like any other skill. Like if you're into it and you enjoy it, you just have to put the time into it. And that's all it is. Like there's no real shortcuts or anything like that. You just have to do it every day and just stay focused. But yeah, it's totally okay to be self-taught. And for someone who's self-taught, I'm like doing pretty good for myself. Like even besides like Doodley and whatnot, you know, I'm considered a senior in my current job. So you can get there. You just need the skills. I mean, that's all people care about is portfolio. So but yeah, my title currently is senior animator. So like if I'm a senior animator and I'm self-taught, then I feel like anybody can make it. I saw Bird Hunter. Pin up my message for the funny. Sure. You're welcome. Don't say I never did nothing for you. All right. So let's wrap up. Yeah, I didn't want this stream to go on for much longer than 2 hours. Mouse Fungin. This was super fun. I hope. Oh, I put it up. This is super fun. I hope we do another one soon. I'd like to see a more advanced sequence with running, jumping, etc. someday. Yeah. So what I'm currently feeling, let me give you sort of a read on what I had so far from this stream. I think for me, it was a little too clinical, where I think I want it to be a little bit more relaxed, where I am sometimes just working. I think these streams, the goal of these will be like kind of like any other like work stream I might do, but I'm trying to make sure I detail every step that I'm doing, you know, and zooming in when I need to, like I was doing earlier. Let me play this just so people know we're wrapping up. Also zoom out a bit. But I think whenever I am with a stream like this, if I'm just focusing on my work, and I think I want to interact with people a bit more, and not have it be so clinical, because in a public space that's free, you kind of can't do that. So I think I'll try to, now that I've done this test, next time it'll be a bit more like an average work stream, but it'll be like we're collectively learning together. It's not like I am just doing it and you're watching me. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that was something I didn't quite like about this so far. Yeah, I think I learned a lot in terms of how to do something like this. So, and yeah, maybe we'll play music. I didn't have music playing because I want to cut this for a video. But now that I think about it, I could probably run a second instance of OBS and just have that version not play music and then record that. I have to look into it now that I think about it. So we'll figure it out. Because yeah, I think music probably adds a lot to the experience. All right. sounds fun. I'll make sure to be there next time. Sweet. Oop. That's actually a good question. To get better at 3D animation, what should I be focused on? Focus on this kind of goes for any animation in general. Just focus on movement. With 3D animation, try not to focus on like the character as a whole. Try to start with the basic movement, like position the character where they need to be. If they're jumping, don't start with like each part of the jump pose. Like if you're animating a jump, don't start with like positioning the legs and pushing the legs down. You know, start with that. Start with the actual movement upwards, and then start with the legs, just like we did today. If you rewind the stream earlier, we started with the feet moving back and forth and the upper body movement. Start with the absolute basics first. Don't get too distracted by by creating like a very specific pose right when you're starting the animation. I think when you get better at 3D animation, you can eventually do that. That's called blocking. You know, you block out each pose. But that's only whenever you start to understand the specifics of 3D animation. So thank you for that question. So I think I'll start wrapping up. So this stream will be public. I'm going to try and keep it available to everybody. I'm going to put it in a playlist, but it's not going to be like my other VODs where it goes unlisted in a playlist. I'm going to see how it looks and observe what YouTube suggests. Because previously, the problem with my previous streams and why I unlisted them into a public playlist was because YouTube was suggesting them to people, which was messing up with my algorithm. But for this stream specifically, I think it'll work as a public stream. We'll see what happens. But I hope you liked it. On this specific set of OBS scenes, I don't have my usual good night screen, so we'll play our usual ending track. Well, actually, this is a nice ending track, isn't it? I kind of like this. This is nice and peaceful. So let's just observe Kimberly walking. Oh wait, I messed with her keyframes, didn't I? She has a hitch in one of her up and down keys. Yeah, here. What? 1 second. What did I do here? There we go. Much better. Okay. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for stopping by, and I will, in the future, this will ideally be cut up as a main channel video, and I'll do more streams in the future like this, and make changes as needed, and see what happens. So thank you for stopping by. Let's play my usual. It feels weird to end a stream without doing my usual ending track. I like this song too much. This is from the Rhythm Heaven soundtrack. So thank you for stopping by. Yeah. Peter, Sam, unfortunately we're wrapping up. I am doing good though, so don't worry. I can't have my OBS is not currently set up with the usual good night screen, so but we're gonna wrap up. Sorry about that. So yeah, good night. And if you want to support me, patreon.com/Doodley. I'll do these more regularly. Try to keep them free. I don't want to block access to some of these basic tutorials. So we'll see what happens. But thank you for stopping by. All right. Good night, everybody. See you in your dreams. Bye. Good night.